Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership at Heart podcast. And today, the long awaited conversation with really, I think, one of the more beautiful humans on the planet, Alex Allen. I am so excited for you to be here. So, welcome.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I'm so excited to be here on your podcast. And thank you for having me.
So this has been, for those who are listening, it's been a journey for me because I've been watching him from afar, which it's so funny because people often say that to me. Oh my gosh, I've been watching you for years. And so I've been watching him from afar, mostly as it relates to his post around his son, Bryce. And so I'm going to want to definitely delve into this. But first, tell everybody, where are you right now in your leadership journey?
I manage really what we call the business engagement strategy. We're focused on an increase in leadership capability, and we partner with business leaders to foster an inclusive culture.
Mm. Oh, I love that a lot. Yeah, excited. We'll dive into that a little bit more. But first, okay. Let's just talk about like how you got started on the journey of being kind of more open, vulnerable, transparent with sharing things about your son. Maybe you should just share with everybody who's listening a little bit about that journey, a little bit about Bryce, because and then maybe they can go follow you and see all the great things about that amazing young man.
Yeah, oh no, no problem. I hope you're doing well, Heather. And I tell you, when you say journey, that's exactly what it is. I would say my son was born in Atlanta in 2004. His name is Bryce Christopher Allen. And at that time, very interestingly, my wife and I were obviously going through the prenatal and pregnancy journey, we found out that he had water in his brain. And so we're in Atlanta. I'm originally from the Maryland kind of DMV area. And I had taken a job with Home Depot, and I maybe had been maybe 6 months on the job, maybe closer to a year on the job. And we had a checkup with her doctor, and I was there too. And surprisingly, and I say we because of me and my wife were kind of like in this together. She was probably 4 or 5 months in, and we had a sonogram, and a sonogram revealed that he had water in his brain. And so we were scared, we were embarrassed, we had all the traumatic feelings around potentially bringing a child into this world that would have physical, mental, mobility, all the things that disabilities provides, the complexity of that. And interestingly enough, I was in the doctor's appointment with her, a follow-up doctor's appointment. This was after the fact, after we knew. And I looked at a magazine, and I think it was Time, so don't quote me on this, but it was Time magazine. And what Time magazine did, they rated the by state, pediatric neurology by state. So it had the number one all the way through number 50 rated. And interestingly enough, so we're sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, and Georgia was 50 out of 50, and Maryland was number one out of 50. And so at that time, I thought to myself is that we need to kind of get home. And home was really where I'm close with my sister, obviously, and my mother and father, my wife's mother and father are all in kind of this DMV area. So we had decided to move back to the Maryland area. The reason why I tell you that story is
Mm.
because it's the complexity and the emotional trauma that parents go through as they want to, as we all want the best for our children, right? We want them to have equal opportunity, equal access. We want them to thrive and reach their potential and such. So I spent many years blaming myself, being depressed, having to kind of like the complexity of bringing our child after surgeries and the plethora of doctor's appointments and all of the things that have kind of happened with Bryce over his lifetime. I really internalized that, and I was ashamed of it. I didn't know how to handle it. And so when I came to Cisco in 2018, after they acquired the company Broadsoft, I was a transitional employee. And so I had some time to find a job at Cisco. And I was not connected into the culture. And so I really wanted to leave. I wanted to get my severance package and leave Cisco, and I was ready to go. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a job in the DMV area. And so I had gone through some interview processes and such. And then the last week before I was going to be on severance or laid off, Cisco offered me a job. And at that time, I was in a very vulnerable state because number one, I doubted myself. I didn't have an internal network. So all the people that I had worked with for the last few years at the company Broadsoft were all basically moved on. And I was insecure related to really not having an opportunity in the DMV area. And so, but then I looked at Bryce and I thought to myself, with the way that he has been able to navigate in such an authentic, compassionate way, and the things that he is able and capable to do, why couldn't I do the same thing? And so in 2018 into 2019, when I was able to obtain this job, I knew that I was going to do it my way. And I needed to have the confidence and the same level of passion and authenticity and compassion and the things that Bryce, the way he lives his life, I needed to apply that to who I was and understanding my own identity as a parent and a father and a Black man who is raising a child or with disabilities. And so, Heather, that was the moment. And I have one other story I want to tell you. I don't want to go too long here. One other story that's connected to that, related to identity, that really amplified and elevated me to really be confident in who I am over the last 5 years.
But take us back, just step right back, because you did a leap. And I would venture to guess people would be like, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second, wait, you leapt too far, and now I know what's going on. Okay, so take us back to Bryce. So he's born.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
there were some years. I don't know how many, because I think you
Yes.
said 2000. Yeah, so there was a lot of years. Okay, so
Yeah.
you don't have to
Years.
tell us every single little step, but he's born,
Yes.
and what happens? What does the doctor tell you?
Yeah. So the doctors told us not much, right? So they said, hey, he's going to have water in his brain. We don't know the capacity of what he's going to, is he going to be, have mental challenges? We don't know to the level or the extent that he would have mental challenges. They didn't know the level and extent of his mobility challenges. They didn't have any idea. The brain is very dynamic. And so when he was born, he came out like any other baby, right? We were prepared for everything. Like, we were prepared for the absolute every scenario that we could think of. But to be transparent, Heather, his birth in Atlanta was as seamless and as straightforward as any birth that I could imagine that I'm aware of. He has an older brother too. So, but yeah, so that came and happened, and we really just kind of started life. But as he kind of missed milestones, we did do early intervention around occupational therapy, physical therapy, obviously speech therapy. We were really on it from really day one, and we were really on top of it because we knew that he did have. We expected that he was going to have some disabilities. We just didn't know the extent. Hopefully that answers your question. And then,
It does. It does. And
other
so now it
milestones.
does. Because I'm going to show you after we get to here, I promise you, I'm going here for reason two, because there's another connection point. And in the work that you and I do, it is all about finding the connection points, like the intersection points between our lived experiences, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so you're doing all these interventions, and then things start to become more and more obvious. And so what's kind of a turning point, or what was the conclusion in all that? What'd you find out?
I found out, I tell you what, I don't know if I have the answer to that. I think
Mm,
because I'm still on that journey. Just to be,
mm,
I think as each obstacle kind of came in front of us, we just dealt with it.
mm.
And so there is no strategic plan. I wish there was a strategic plan on how you raise children, but I think for me, it allowed me to appreciate things in a much more transparent and honest, with gratitude way, in the way that he's been able to then, like, deal with these challenges in the most loving, positive,
Mm.
aspirational way that he's been able to do it, whether that be surgeries. Because to your point, like, next was, okay, he's not walking. Okay, he's not doing this. Oh, or because Bryce is actually a triplegia, so it's his left arm and both of his legs. So you start to see things going on with his arm, and you try to go deal with that. And then you might have he was walking on his tiptoes, so we try to go deal with that. We're related to having surgeries related to lengthening his muscle lengthening, related to his limbs and such. And so you really just dealt with that kind of one step at a time. I do think that when we came to Maryland, so we left Atlanta around 2007. And then right when we came to Maryland, it was a seamless transition. We got right into the system per se, and we
Mhm.
were really into that early intervention around him being a toddler and then obviously being a preschooler. And then that was really supportive. That was really helpful. And obviously, we did private therapies as well, occupational, physical. I mean, so that's kind of you're kind of just taking it one step at a time and trying to help him reach his potential. But I'll tell you, I think where it showed up most was for me was at work. And so I'll tell you the story.
Mhm.
My older son used to participate in this kind of great situation where it was great. It was bring your child to work day, right? And so as a 6 and 7 year old, my older son, it was very seamless. You drop him off, he goes and does his thing. They kind of build a product and then they come back. And then one year I decided, okay, Bryce is 2 years behind his older brother. I'll go with him, right? And think about that. That's probably 2012. So it's a little ways, a long time ago. And he participated in the Bring Your Child to Work Day. I participated with him. And at the end, they brought all the children together and like all the ages, and they did like one little like celebratory event at the end of the day. And I remember Bryce shouting. So he screamed out. And obviously, many of the people kind of like turned around and looked, right? And I remember a senior vice president, the look that the senior vice president gave me and my son from such a disdain. I've never really gotten over it. And it's imprinted in my mind, the look that he gave us. Obviously, I was very embarrassed. I was trying not to get in trouble per se. I kind of immediately took Bryce out of the conference room or wherever we were. And then I just took him home and then came back and picked up my son. But what haunts me is that I did not advocate, I did not set that situation straight in the moment. And I think one of the things that is a burning platform for me related to the work that we do,
Mhm.
Heather, around underrepresented and marginalized communities, that's not going to happen again.
Mhm.
That's not going to happen again in that capacity ever. And so that kind of ability, or let's call it confidence, to take chances and risks and courage, that's something that I have tried to demonstrate on a day-to-day basis at my job at Cisco.
Mm. Thank you so much for that. As you were going through this, my daughter was born with sensory processing disorder, and she was also born with this like major, like lots of holes in her heart.
Mm,
And she was our first kid, our first girl, for our first kid. Same thing. And we leave, and they said you can't go home. You need to take her to a cardiac pediatrician. We're like in tears, like what's about to happen? We have like open hearts. What's happening here? And it was a whole journey with her too. The same kind of very similar to what you described as far as she was a tippy toe walker, she was OTPT, all the things, and now she's a senior in college and it's a communications major, and she had so much
that's
speech therapy. She wasn't speaking until she was like over two, so it was like that, very similar, except for she's not a triplegic, so she doesn't have like there
right.
wasn't those levels of just even more complexity where, but there was a lot of stuff where she was like not understanding how to interact, the social things
Yeah,
and all those things. So it as I would watch you over the years from a distance,
yeah,
I would see the beauty unravel with for your just deep love, but also like you exactly how you describe him. Oh my gosh, I have to meet him someday. But that whole like just the joy
yeah,
and the resilience. But I just see joy. Like joy is a thing that I think of when I think of the videos and the things that I've watched you put forward. And but yeah, also just like where are our excuses? Because I feel like in life we make just tons of excuses for just so many things. And we
yeah,
are kind of a blaming culture too,
yep,
instead of like a culture that just says I'm going to own it, I'm going to make the right choices, I'm going to show up in the moment, I'm going to just like I'm going to deal with the things in front of me, like you say, as they come.
yep.
And so we get stuck a lot as a culture, I think. And so when you see him, you're just like, oh, so I'm definitely wanting everybody to listen to who's listening to definitely follow Alex and just like watch that journey as it unravels, and you'll see exactly why I'm bringing him on here. And I love the fact that the work that you do And it kind of like this catalyst, like what you just said. It's like this thing happened. I wasn't real happy about myself. Even someone who looks like me, so a black man, like I still was in the place where I didn't have the courage to
Mm.
really kind of set I always say, like when it comes to this belonging place, people have to be courageous enough to speak up when they see things aren't right. And in this case, it happens to you, and you're like, I don't know, I don't want to ruffle the feathers. But then what happens with people who don't even look like you, who really aren't feeling courageous enough because it's not their lived experience, but they're seeing it from a distance. They're watching things unravel and not feeling comfortable. And so I just I love the fact that you are being vulnerable, open, just putting it out there. Because I have to say that it's very rare that a man, anyway, will say the things you've said, and absolutely very rare that a black man will. So the fact that you've said it and just put it all out, right? You talk about this, I know, in some of the things that you've contributed to at Cisco and the writing and the things you do. And I'm 100% aligned with you that we can't give people permission to show up in this way if we don't get a level of comfort about showing up in this way.
Yeah, I just want to also tell you, every time I make a post, there's a self-consciousness that comes over me and says, should I be doing this? Is this too personal? Is this something that would not be received well? And I always have that self-conscious after every post where I'll ask either my wife or a colleague or another person, like, hey, do you think this is okay? Like, and then they're
Yes.
always like, go for it. I always get that encouragement. But I also will say this to you, Heather, is that I'm going to tie something back. So in 2019, when I joined Cisco, I was invited to an event where Brian Stevenson, who's the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, was having a conversation or a fireside chat with Cisco's current CEO, Chuck Robbins, president and CEO. And they were having a conversation around the power of proximity.
Mm.
And when you are close to the marginalized, when you and close to the excluded, new insights would emerge, new understandings would emerge that you can't attain from afar. That's what Brian Stevenson said. And I'm sitting in this like banquet room of Cisco employees. I have to admit that I was one of the few Black people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking about the power of proximity in the spirit of mass incarceration. So I'm having this moment where this power of proximity, I think about my own experience. I'm like, well, who in the work setting has actually been proximate to me? Who knows me intimately?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows me intimately? And who would I say that I would trust to even be able to share these things with at work? And so I did create the proximity initiative, which we can talk about as a different, at a different podcast. But I'll tell you, through the proximity initiative, and for us, or for me in particular, I'm going to speak to my experience, to own my own narrative is the power. And
Mm.
so each time I go to post, I think to myself, own your own narrative, because people will make the narrative up for you. I have been called everything you can think of in the corporate setting. And I'm thinking now, if I can put things out there that explain my lived experience or show my lived experience in a very authentic, compassionate way, in real way, maybe that helps someone else relative to that data point that might be going through something either similar than me or even different than me, but it's a challenge, and maybe we can inspire people to try to drive change. So
Mm.
that's the thought behind it all. And I just wanted to tie those two things together. That also gave me amplified the courage around being able to be able to own our own narrative.
I love that so much. Yeah, I 100% agree. Part of like all the when I speak, this all the work I do stems from the my original story, and it does and it's a story of exclusion, really. So it's a story of
Mm.
exclusion, but me getting to the point where I talk about caring, leadership, belonging, listening is all about wanting others not to be excluded. It's all about making sure people feel seen, heard, and valued, right? It's just all about that. So everything I do, that narrative of like, here's a story, and yes, it was painful, but all the work that I'm doing and all the focus I have is about producing the opposite in the world. So it's owning the narrative and saying, I want to be the result of a different lived experience for other people. Right.
Right. That's
And
right.
I think that's just so powerful. And I think so by you sharing the things that you do out there,
Yeah.
again, it stands out to me, which is why I've been kind of pursuing you for a couple of years because
Yeah.
it stands out to me. Because again, men don't usually show up that way. Black men don't, people of color, we just don't. Partly, it's part of it. It's just, it's like our history. Part of it is
Okay.
it's just, it's so, it's complicated, isn't it, Alex?
Oh
It's
yes.
so
Oh
complicated for
yeah.
me. We couldn't even get it done in this podcast. But thinking about that, I was like, I have to highlight it and the beautiful nature of you as a father, kind of in the struggle and kind of like all the things you just talked about, the complexities, and at the same time, this beautiful person, this human that you and your wife brought into this world, and how he displays resilience and joy in ways where again, where are our excuses?
Right. Right.
So it's those two things taking place and unfolding is what we need to, I think, be highlighting more of. And I think we do it on all sides. I'm doing it on this side for you as your unique identity, but I think it would be equally important to do the same thing for someone else who has a different identity. But I think that's the key, is like just to understand there's these complexities. I feel like in our current world, we are we have just really been like, it's this or it's that. It's right or
Yeah.
it's wrong. It's this right. And we just have become that kind of world. And I think people like you and I live in the world where it's not that way.
Mm,
It can't be that way for us to live in a way that we would feel joyful, right?
that's right. That's right.
Just can't.
It's not, it's, that's right. And I think it's nuanced, it's complex, it's not black or white.
Mm-mm.
I'll tell you this too, and I think you touched on it for a second there. It's the systemic nature of being from a marginalized community and the lack of trust in the systems and equitable access and things of that sort that permeates in at least my community. I believe it is for
Mhm.
your community too. And I will say this to you is that I am extremely blessed and grateful that my parents, who both attended and graduated from Florida A&M University, historically black college, was able to instill in me the courage and confidence to really try to strive and achieve and really do my best, like you're doing, to break down those barriers. And so I think it's a lifelong aspiration that we'll have. And I think those, and again, I also just want to note that the systemic or marginalized nature of the way that what we're dealing with today and what we have been dealing with since our existence is still there. It's
Mhm.
still there. And I think your podcast providing opportunities, us being able to own our narratives and being able to lift each other up in these, let's call it trying times, it's going to
Mhm.
be more important.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, how would you describe or define your leadership style in the role that you play there at Cisco?
Yeah, I tell you, I think it's authentically compassionate. And it's evolved. I tell you, when I first started my career, I was much different related to I wanted everybody to like me, and I wanted to be I oh so I'll tell you this. And so growing up, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and my family, when I was born, they moved from a kind of a predominantly black neighborhood into a predominantly white neighborhood. And so as I was growing up, I absolutely had this duality of how I can be in my home versus how I can be in society. And so growing up, related to navigating society, I wanted to be accepted. And so the things that I would do to try to position myself to be accepted or liked or be a part of the in crowd, I can now reflect back and understand why I did that. I think today, from having these, let's call it that duality, and also having to really trying to navigate corporate society, I now can look back and be more confident and more authentic in who I am because of the lived experiences that I've had within corporate America. And so right now I'm in this between, I'll just be honest, between those lived experiences that I have some clarity on related to really being much more confident around being a father of a son with disabilities. It's really amplified me into this authentically compassionate. And I would also give Cisco some credit for that too, because they created an environment where I was accepted. I was accepted. I was a part of for who I am, right? For the strengths that I provide, for the authenticity that I provide, the courage that they've given me an environment where I can take risks and really be able to be my best performing self within the organization. But I think it's all these things that have kind of come together has really helped providing me with this opportunity, and I'm so grateful for it.
Mm. So is there a time we can see that, yeah, there's an evolution and that you're just such a big-hearted human who
Yeah.
wants to make a big impact in the world? When we think about leadership at the heart or carrying leadership, which is the space I kind of live in too, what can you think of a specific time when maybe you did not show up as such a caring leader? Where if you look, when you look back now, it might be the thing that haunts you as far as it relates to how you showed up in the moment. And so we're looking for a specific story so that the listeners can maybe they might see themselves in the interaction or in the instance. And then tell us what was the catalyst or the trigger or something to kind of make you go, uh-oh, and then kind of maybe become more enlightened in the process.
Yeah, I think I could, there's examples happening today and last year, last week, last month. I mean, I think what I try to be is transparent around the intentions, humble in the way or the approach that I use, and then also authentic in the style that I kind of come across it. And I'll tell you an example, and I won't say this person's name. I won't say this person's
Yeah.
name, but so there was a gal that I work with, and she is gay, and her and I were having a conversation around lived experiences. We were talking about like being our authentic self, and she did work for me. And I said to her, and I made this comment, and I said to her, and I was meaning good intentions by this. And I said, yeah, that's your lifestyle. And she said, nope. Mm-mm-mm. She said, that is who I am at my being. This isn't a this isn't my choice. Like I'm not choosing to be gay versus heterosexual. This is who I am. And that language that you use, Alex, needs to be corrected to really truly understand me. And I would say in that moment, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was all the negative feelings that we have around making a mistake in this world of identity. I felt that. But what I needed to do is process, be humble, and truly learn. And when we truly learn, trust me, Heather, I won't make that mistake again. Right. And so I think that's the key to kind of my new like aspiration around how I tackle things is that I have to be humble enough to really be able to be curious, seek to fully understand, and then change the behavior, or what we call it, widen my lens
Mhm.
around other people's lived experiences. But I can only do that when I know mine.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I kind of feel like for all of us who make those mistakes, and for DEI practitioners or DEI people who are in that space, we never think we'll ever say the thing or do the thing, or and we all do. Like that's the humanity of all of it. And there's also a lot of bias every single one of us has that we carry it around like credit cards in our wallet. And it's like how we
Right.
spend that. How do we spend those biases in a positive or negative way, right? And so I think when we consider number one, your emotional intelligence to say, uh-oh, there has to be self-grace there. And like I always say, on the other end, from her to you, there has to be a certain level of grace given that says, even him who kind of is the head of this particular right, he's also allowed not to say all the right things at all the right times, and we just have to give the grace. And I think so it's both sides. We have to understand what our bias, that we all have the biases, what it means for positive and negative, how it helps or how it detracts from relationships, and at the same time we have to be on the other end, those in marginalized groups, to say, I'm going to give this person grace because I get the intent. It's the
Mm.
intent many times. And
Yeah.
I get like, I know, gosh, oh my gosh, I remember for some years there, it's all about, it's not up to us to educate people. It's not up to everybody else to do their own thing. I get that, but I think coming from your background, yours even more recent background, thinking about your son and mine kind of childhood coming up, there's this it's there's a level of empathy and almost compassion that we exhibit for others when we see their discomfort and not knowing how to be with us, not
Yeah.
knowing how to respond to us. It's just such an interesting place to be. And it's hard for maybe the average person who doesn't have those different, more complicated backgrounds. I think most everybody does, but I think there's a lot of people who do, but they don't see it maybe, or maybe they aren't as close to it, kind of like you were talking about. And so when you're in it and you're knee deep in it, you are able to step outside yourself and look at the world in another way than maybe you could if you didn't have any of that closeness, the proximity, right, to that lived experience like that.
That's right. And I'll tell you, I just want to be really clear. It was my mistake. I had to own it. I had to seek to be humble. I had to be the one who was curious, and she graciously provided me with the opportunity to learn.
Love it.
And so Brian Stevenson also says this: learning is an action, right? Related to the power of proximity. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to take that action to fully learn and lean in. And that was a mindset.
Yes,
That's a mindset, right? That's a
totally.
mindset that is very difficult to have when you're feeling the emotions of shame and discomfort and guilt and all the things that we are going to feel day to day. We have to power through it,
Yeah.
power through it, and lean in. I know the word lean in is always a buzzword here, but we have to power through it, dig deeper, seek to understand, ask more clarifying questions, and in the with the spirit of learning.
I know that it's a buzzword, but it's real. It's real. Leaning in to step in the shoes of someone else's experience and then do something about helping them, doing something, I think is critical. And it's not going away. It's more critical now. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about kind of the intersectionality, the intersection points, the commonalities, the connection points, there's so much complexity under each human. And I just want everybody listening, like, do not settle on what you see on the outside because there are just so many things. Even just when I was preparing for this interview, I was like, oh my gosh, there's that. We have this. Oh, and we also have this in common. Oh, and we always and I mean, and there's some obvious ways we're in common on the outside, but there's all these other things that are like, I'm sure if we spent more time with each other, there'd just be so many connection points. And I think that is the beauty of where we're landing, where we should be focusing on right now, and where we're at with our politics and where we're at with our nation and our world. We need to be focusing on what are the intersection points, the connection points that bring us together and help us learn, like you're talking about. There's a beauty in the learning. And I
Mm-hmm.
learn every time I see the stuff you put out there with Bryce. Like there's a learning there. There's kind of like a joy. It's the feeling for me isn't like, well, my life isn't good. It actually is, how can my life be better as I
Yeah.
see how he's living his life? And I think that's just something, the learning is beautiful. It really is. It really
No,
is.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
So now we get to turn the tables and you become kind of the podcast host. And you can ask me any question that maybe comes to your mind, and I'll answer it as best I can since I didn't have any prep time.
Oh, no problem. And we do this with in our company, but I'd love to understand more about you. And what I mean by that is like, tell me about your name, right? So is there an origin context to your name, or just if you don't mind, just if you sharing that and also maybe sharing a little bit about your lived experience, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to hear that.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so well, name. My dad picked my name. I don't know exactly why. So it's Heather Rochelle Younger. And I don't know why he chose it. Funny enough, if you think of most Heathers, they're blonde hair, blue eyes. And so it's always a fun thing when people are like, "Are you Heather?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I know. It's I don't look like most Heathers." It is what it is. I am biracial, so mom is white and Jewish, and my dad was black and Christian. And so that upbringing was interesting. The way it shaded the way I see the world, mostly because my mom's parents weren't at all happy about that marriage. And so mom and dad eloped, and there really wasn't a lot of acceptance of him and to a large extent me. And so a lot of my childhood, while I could kind of have some connections behind closed doors, I was never allowed to go to large family gatherings. I couldn't go to bar mitzvahs and weddings and anything like that. And so I felt like the literal black sheep of the family. I was really kind of hidden from most people. So many people didn't know I existed. And so that was a hard place. And my dad wasn't allowed to go to different things, even if it was just at my grandmother's house. And so for me, I felt real early on that not feeling seen, not feeling like I had a voice, not feeling important, not feeling that sense of belonging in my own family. And it created in me the opposite effect of what some people do, which is like, like anger and like, I'm going to get back at them, like in a way that it didn't. What it created in me was not a victim, but it said, instead of being the victim of the circumstance, I'm going to take the circumstance and I'm going to turn it on its head and I'm going to show you how that's the wrong way to live. And I'm going to really go a different path and try to create spaces for people where they feel like they can speak up, where there is a safety that's there, where they can be themselves and be valued and appreciated for that. So I'm the only child, and I kind of had to deal with that and some other drug addiction stuff in my household as a kid by myself. And I became old really fast. Like I became, people always thought I was much older because I was much more mature in that regard. But I'm really grateful for that upbringing and that struggle, because it helped me be able to, again, stand in the middle of kind of the chaos that we're in now and look around and be like, you guys are all damn crazy. Like, I don't know what's happening. Just look on both sides and be like, I don't know what's happening here. And so I feel like I can uniquely do that. At some points, I go to law school. I graduated from law school and I haven't practiced for years, but people always thought I was going to be like Supreme Court justice. They always thought you're the person who can kind of, have this strength, but you can kind of see both sides. And so to this day, that strength, I have that same kind of the ability to know what I know, and at the same time do what you said, which is the authentic compassion, and really lean in to want to dig deep to find out what's happening with other people. So I'm really grateful for the background and the experience that I had as it relates to that. So I'm not sure if that answered your
Good.
question.
That's a fascinating story. I have 10 other questions that we can probably do another time. But what led you to come be a podcast or have your own podcast? Like what was your journey to where you are today?
Yeah. So the podcast was, in my mind, one other medium to get out the word on leading with heart, carrying leadership. So it became who I was. It was my identity of this caring leader. Every time I'd managed people for 25 years, it was like who I was. And it was who I was because of what I didn't have younger. So it became my stamp of like, I'm going to make sure that people around me feel heard, valued, and understood. I want to make sure that, so I'd always would just go out of my way doing that. And so as a result, I was really successful as a manager. But it was some years ago, I was in a company that was going through a merger of 5 companies. And it was kind of a small tech organization. And they were merging with 4 others. And I'm leading customer experience. And I go to the head of HR because the culture is going downhill and people are coming to me complaining. And I say to her, we have to do something about our culture, this mistrust. People are so afraid. And she said, you're right. You should go do something about that. And I was like, wait, what? And I'd already acted kind of like this culture ambassador person, uplifting people. Again, like I said, I'm a person who says like, everybody come into my circle, everybody, right? I'd always do that and uplift. So I took her on up on a suggestion, created an employee engagement council, and brought people around the table who I knew would be open to kind of having this discussion. How do we make this work? How do we make people be less fearful in this combined culture? And it started to work. We started to do things to break down the walls of mistrust. But then the merger didn't go well. They had hired a whole bunch of people from Oracle, a lot of high-paid people. It just didn't go well. I think they just invested too fast without seeing kind of proof of concept of this new product they were trying to roll out. And so there was 200 people laid off in the first round, and I was one of them. And that put me on the journey of starting to write on LinkedIn, starting to write that first book on employee loyalty. And now I'm writing my 4th and 5th books, all related to how we all can like have choices, show up with more care through listening, through self-leadership, through caring leadership. And so that's the journey. So that kind of the podcast, the keynoting, the consulting, the training, the certification programs, the master classes. I have so much content, but it's all about how do I touch different people around the globe. I can't do it myself. And how do I do that? And so I'm just continuing down that journey to figure out how I can continue to impact people. How do you continue, people understand that they have the power to show up in such positive ways for people who look to them for guidance in some way? And so I'm always on the lookout for people like you who are doing that kind of their day job, yes, but just what are some other ways we can highlight people who are they're caring leaders? They're not perfect. None of us are perfect, but that they really are on an intentional journey to be compassionate every day. And that's what I'm here for.
Last question for me. Thank you so much. That's great. That's inspiring too. What would be one inclusive behavior you think people could take to drive a more of an inclusive culture in society? What would be that one action that people
I
can
think
take?
listening. I really have leaned in real heavily on listening. And listening to me is the seeking part you talked about, but it also has to do with how we process it, what we recognize in the unspoken word, the actions that we take on the tail end, making sure we close a loop to connect the dots for people that we actually have heard them by our actions. So I think listening is the most inclusive thing. And I think as a leader, we don't do nearly enough of that. So I think, for example, if you're at a table, you're at the decision making table, speak last.
Mm,
So put the conversation on the table, and then you do not share your opinion until everyone has spoken, because
yep,
very rarely will people want to counter or dissent with you.
yep,
So speak last, because you might actually change your opinion. You might be able to texture what you were going to say if you just wait for others to say things, and then now they feel like they are included. They feel like, oh, this person does value me because they're not canceling me. They're
right.
letting me speak first. So I would say that would be the big one.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking those questions. Really
Yeah,
good questions. Love it. Love it. Love it.
yeah.
Okay. So for those who are listening now, we have people that are mid to senior level. We have people who are leading entrepreneur organizations. We have all kinds of people that are listening in. For those who are maybe at a crossroads or like they might need just a little extra inspiration. What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you would leave them with as they go on their journey to becoming better leaders of the heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we have this kind of one framework that we use is head, hand, heart. And we believe that the knowledge that you have, seeking to understand, learning, researching, follow a simple action could be follow someone on LinkedIn who has a different identity than you, right? The heart is really, and I think this is pertaining to your podcast, your heart is really the things that it's really the thing that will inspire you. It'll be that inspiration around really the motivation around, driving things and moving and shifting and changing. And then the hand is really the actions, right? So it's the actions that you want to take. And so what I would say to anybody is three things. One is the the knowledge that you build, the reading, the development that you put into yourself around people that may be different than you or from underrepresented or marginalized communities. There's a lot of things to read and learn about. I think the heart, I would say, would be get proximate. And so people who are different than you to understand their lived experience. And that proximity will also motivate you. It'll also compel you to learn more as well. And the last thing would be to take one simple action from the information that you receive related to the literature that you read, as well as to the proximity that you have, the experience, the proximity, the interaction that you have with people that are different than you, that will compel you to take action. And through those activities, that will give you the clarity and the insight on what to do.
Mm.
And so that would be the approach that I would use for you and your audience.
I love it. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, I mean, one of the things that pops into my head when I think of you in relation with Bryce, how you are at work, the work that you do is compassionate action. And when
Mm-hmm.
we think of empathy, it's leaning into like understand how someone feels and where they're positioned and where they're coming from, right? And compassion is taking action on their behalf.
So let me
It
so let me
it's
show
the action.
let me share something with you. When we went on our little getaway, my family and I, Bryce loves the kayak. I don't like kayaking. I'm not really getting in the water. I mean, I can swim, but I'm not going to get in the water. And so what I tried to do though is give him our time on that kayak every morning, even though it was the last thing I wanted to do on my vacation. And so in those moments, providing him with that experience in turn has given me something.
Mm,
And so I'll just leave your
mm,
audience with that. I'm so sorry I
mm,
interrupted you there, but I was so excited to share that around Bryce and what he provides me related to the insights and perspectives and the growth that he allows me to have from learning. But it really starts with like doing what you don't want to do, but doing like you like it. Anyway. And so that's really the thought. That's really the thought.
Oh, I love it. So I mean, in the end, it's compassionate action. And sometimes it's the action that you're taking is for the benefit of the other, but maybe it's not related to your lived experience. And I think that's a very important note to end on. Just be prepared to do the things for others around you that may or may not benefit you directly. I mean, one way or another, it comes back to you, but just know that when you pour into others, it comes back into you as well. So love it so much, Alex. I'm just so thankful that you said yes, and the pursuit was worth it.
Thank you so much, and appreciate your persistence and resilience, and thank you so much, Heather.
Thanks for listening, everybody, to the Leadership at the Heart podcast. Be well.